So you're running for State Senate in District 10.
Mm-hmm.
Your opponent is Jay Kahn, Democrat. You're running as a Republican. So assuming that you win, what are your legislative priorities? What are you going to push for?
Well, the biggest things I would push for in the state senate would be to avoid an income and sales tax, bring back some state money to this side of the state, which seems to always be lacking. All the infrastructure development and financial imperatives seem to always go to the eastern side or central side of the state, ignoring the north and the west.
So how do you do that?
I mean, there's a multitude of ways, I'm told, but the biggest one that I would support would be basically to incentivize businesses to come out here, basically to promote the growth in this area, and basically just do what needs to be done legislatively to get that accomplished, whatever mechanism in place that could be used.
Okay.
So all avenues are open.
Are there particular Senate committees that you would hope to be appointed to, or have some experience you think would?
I would be happy to serve on any of the committees, and to me they're all just as important. So, no, specifically not.
So, Chester, one of the things that's become crystal clear during this election cycle is, among New Hampshire voters, is that the opioid crisis is the prevailing topic on voters' minds, the number one priority. So, and it's pretty well understood that a multi-pronged approach is needed to address this issue. Law enforcement, treatment, education. How would you sum up your priorities in dealing with this battle?
Well, the big thing when addressing this issue that I would support would be to treat it not as a crime but as a disease, and to work towards the treatment of that disease. As you said, it's multifaceted, and unfortunately that's the answer, is you have to approach it from multiple directions. Education, of course, we need to start maybe even younger and start talking to children about these issues. But more importantly, we've got to just get rid of the stigma of criminality to this and just say, you have a problem, let's help you, and approach it from that direction and treat it as medical, not criminal.
And a piece that's is clearly connected to all this too is mental health. And we know the challenges on that front too is a loss of beds. There's a significant loss of funding through the agencies that provide some help on this front. And so you have this long wait list to get a bed and get treatment. What would you say to the people who are on that wait list who are waiting to get help, but there's no place for them and nobody to work with them?
The only thing we can say is that we would obviously try to work on improving that situation. If there was a magic wand that could be waved and either party being capable of wielding it, I'm sure it would already be done. So what we have to do is we just have to keep plugging away and try to figure out ways to improve their situation.
Is it something that the state should be putting more economic resources into, or?
I think the biggest thing we could do would be to encourage your communities to really take the lead on it while the state's trying to get their act together. No, I do believe the state has an invested interest in assisting with this and absolutely has an imperative to do so, but we should try to branch out to the communities to have them take some ownership of the situation as well.
So you're here in Keene, and this is an area that obviously is very support group friendly, community oriented. What would you suggest Keene or this area do to help that situation?
Well, there's a multitude of ways they could help, and whether it be different social or service organizations in town sponsoring people into facilities, maybe not necessarily in this area, but certainly sponsorship, support. You got churches in the area that could be of innumerable, immense support in this regard. We do have venues that are untapped. I don't think they're the answer. I think they're just a way to help us get to the answer.
Speaking of that, just to hold on to mental health, I've spoken to some of those organizations you're talking about. One of the big ones in this area is Not Enough Family Services, and they actually say that they are having trouble getting their patients to any hospital in New Hampshire. They often have to go to Maine or Massachusetts or Vermont, and they say that there aren't actually because for different reasons, like the closing of the ward in the spring of Fisher Medical, there are just not enough beds in New Hampshire.
That's one of the reasons I said, even not necessarily in the area. You're absolutely right. We do have a shortage of beds and facilities in this area.
Okay.
So,
Just shifting that to funding, and also to tie in what you said about opioids. So, a lot of the money that's coming this year from opioids comes from a budget surplus of about $100 million. That probably won't be there next year.
you mean surpluses don't just happen?
So, in terms of funding some of these programs you talked about, you have stood against income and sales tax. You mentioned in the beginning. Are there any other sources of revenue that you think you would explore to try to find that funding, or if not, where would you find funding sources right now?
Well, the big, one of the double-edged swords to opposing the broad-based taxes is the question of, well, where do you get it from? I do support expanding of gambling. It's one of those situations where if I'm not willing to support an income or sales tax, you're right, we have to find it from somewhere. And people voluntarily giving up their money in the pursuit of dreams, I suppose, is a fair way to find it. If not here, they'll certainly go to Connecticut or to Keno halls in Maine or various other places. So I do support the expansion of that as a means to gain some additional income. But the problem is if we were to have a sales or income tax, the New Hampshire advantage just evaporates. At this point, it almost doesn't matter if it makes economic sense. If we bring in a sales tax, we're going to lose a slew of our businesses. We're committed. We're pot committed to having no sales tax in the state, and the minute we do, we're going to lose a lot of business.
So are we just kind of having to make do with that reality then? Because politicians on both sides of the aisle don't want broad-based taxes, but everyone's starting to agree that property taxes are going up for a lot of people to unsustainable levels. So you mentioned the gambling tax. Is there anything else you might introduce, or is there any other?
Well, I'm in favor of legalizing marijuana and taxing it to the hilt, because even if we did, it would still be as expensive as it is today. So I'm in favor of expanded vice taxes.
Okay. Have you done any analyses on kind of how that might work within the budget, or?
As far as taxing marijuana?
Either of those things, whether they would kind of sufficiently increase.
Well, whether they would sufficiently do the task or not, going from nothing revenue to something revenue can only help.
Okay.
Do you have any estimate of what legalizing and taxing pot would bring?
I don't have numbers in front of me. I did receive a packet recently from one of the PACs, but their numbers were qualified by these are estimates and are grounded in no real math, so there was no point in guessing with it. I would say that, once again, going from nothing to something is always inherently good, as far as finances, income stream. Imagine, given our proximity to other states like Vermont, it would probably be substantial.
Why do you say that? You're not picturing Mainers all?
Yeah, they might, but...
So switching gears again to healthcare costs. The state legislature has thus far taken a year-to-year approach on backing Medicaid expansion. What kind of approach would you take, and do you think there is anything else the state might do to lower healthcare costs or to make healthcare more available to more people?
Well, first thing I'd say is I would stop doing the insanity of year to year. That's pandering to a body politic. Just either have it or don't. Go to a 5-year plan if you want to, but let's stop pretending we're not going to take it, and do it. Let's just accept it and move with it. Whether we support Affordable Care Act or not, the reality is it's here, and if people want to think it's so easy to dissolve an entitlement or a government program of that magnitude, I would challenge them to give me an example of one in which they have gotten rid of. So it's here. Let's work with it instead of trying to fight against it.
Do you think there are other things that the state could be doing to increase that availability of health care for more people?
Certainly there has to be something. Once again, this comes down to if there was a magic wand that could be waved, it would be done. Medical, as a conservative, my problem with the Affordable Care Act is it's basically forcing you to buy a product. On the other flip side of that is by forcing people to buy the product, in theory, the cost should come down. Now, that hasn't necessarily happened. A lot of that could be attributed to the fact it's the insurance companies that are driving the cost and benefit in their own bailiwick, meaning they have no incentive to drop the price because they're going to get your money anyway. So maybe addressing the insurance companies would be a good first step.
And switching gears again.
Sure.
The cost of higher education is something that's especially talked about today. I mean, we had a story today that talked about how Keene State College has students who graduated last year have one of the highest debt loads in the country. So what do you think the state could the state save money at its colleges and help reduce that debt load for students? Do you think there are ways that there could be cuts or?
There are a multitude of manners in which we could save money in the college system in the state. Right off the bat, a lot of the first thing you hear when it comes to college budgets and whatnot is, oh, we can't cut this, we can't cut that, because think of the long-term effects. Well, the problem is, in a lot of cases, a lot of these either not-for-profit schools or schools that are running right at the cusp of profitability are only running at the cusp because they're finding ways to spend the money they have so they can show a loss or show that they're at the cusp. Administrators shouldn't be making as much money as they're making here. If they want to lower the cost, let's maybe bring the incomes back to reality.
What do you think about the legislature's contributions toward the higher education system in New Hampshire? Do you think the legislature should be contributing more? Or do you think that the level that they contribute now to the USNH system is adequate?
One of the problems with education and the law of unintended consequences is the cost of education in this country ballooned in the 80s, mostly because the government got involved with it. I have a feeling that if you were to pull government out of education, you would see it would inherently and have to drop the cost, because the guarantee of government money is what keeps the price so high. Remove the guarantee of governmental aid, all of a sudden the price will collapse. And businesses, and that's what colleges are, they're businesses, they'll sell their product for what they can get. If they can't get the money they were getting, they will lower their cost, they will find a way to make it work.
Just to piggyback off of what you said in the beginning about debt and student debt, is there anything specific you would do to help students graduating with debt? Any programs that you might do for debt relief?
I think that one of the most important things we can do is when a student is in high school is give them a very thorough economics class and teach them what it means to agree to certain loan types and what impact that'll have. Unfortunately, with the system we have in place, with the costs being artificially gouged and increased, so there isn't much you can do for the people who are already there. All we can do now is really ethically help the people who have yet to come.
So like fixing the front end of the problem instead of the back end.
I can't think of a way that would be legal necessarily to help offset these loans that have happened. I know there are certain people running for other offices who have said they want to forgive student debt and all this, and well, since student debt is like, what is it, $1.4 trillion, that's not only impossible to do, but it's economically reckless. Let's support the people coming forward and hope that the people who have come, that we can improve the economy here enough that they can overcome their debt. But as far as their debt itself, they own it at this point.
Okay.
So if we teach students in high school what it means to go out and borrow $20,000 a year to go to college, and they realize, oh my God, I really don't want to have that hanging over me, but college still costs that much, then you're ostensibly going to have fewer kids going to college.
That'll drop the price. I mean,
is there going to be a lag time there where we just don't have college educated?
Well, very much doubt that would happen from a historical perspective. But more importantly, it's not something that we should be saying that would be the greatest of all evils. It isn't. I mean, you do have trade schools also that would be in play, but more importantly, fewer people being able to afford to go to college will understandably and necessarily lower the cost of education. You may have some lag as far as when they get into school, but once it starts happening, that is an aspect of improvement.
One other aspect of that is that it could possibly, this is just conjecture, but it could possibly increase out-of-state college attendance in around colleges. And one of the issues with that is retaining graduates in New Hampshire. So I just wanted to ask what you would specifically do to, if fewer New Hampshire residents are going to university.
So the back end issue there is, it isn't the schools here that necessarily that we're losing the students that they're coming to the school and then leaving. It's they're leaving because there's no jobs here. You could have free college in New Hampshire. It's not going to keep people here once the schooling is done. You have to bring back manufacturing. You have to bring in tech industry, and the only way to do that is to make New Hampshire as inviting to business as humanly possible. I would support tax deferment, tax credits, whatever we have to do, whatever we have to promise to get businesses to come here, because ultimately at the end of the day, where we get the greatest economic growth isn't from the business and the business taxes that we have. It's from the people who work there who buy homes that pay the property tax. If we get a business to come here and they buy homes and they live here, that's where the improvement is. That's where the growth is.
So is that a chicken or egg scenario? Where if the businesses, high-tech businesses aren't going to come here bringing jobs if people aren't qualified to work there?
Well, I think the upshot is if you have businesses, people will become qualified. It really,
Well, why would the business come here if they can't find workers who are qualified here?
Well, right off the bat, there will be people that are qualified. People are still going to school. People will continue to go to school. But the upshot is if we give them economic incentives to come here, of course then they'll come here. If you make it cheap to do business here, they're going to come here. Why did businesses flood into Ireland after Ireland had a massive recession for the better part of the last decade? It's because they decided they wanted to do business. So they created a tax incentive programs for businesses to come basically flocking to their country. They're doing very well economically now.
I thought it was the Guinness.
That's actually just a benefit.
So we have a 10-year transportation plan the state runs for fixing roads, bridges, etc. And projects shift up and down. They're forever taking more than 10 years once they're on the plan to get done, while others take their place. Do you see a need to address that procedure in any way?
Infrastructure spending is, in one hand, one of the most vital things we can spend money on, but on the other hand, is the least stressful to do because nobody wants to do it because it's not sexy. So, unfortunately, infrastructure, just politicians don't feel the need to make it top of mind because they can't cut a ribbon necessarily because they've repaved the road. So, unfortunately, infrastructure is something we need to address. We need to continue to support it, and I think it is patently stupid to allow bridges to collapse or to become unsafe. It's a lot cheaper to keep things up rather than come back to it afterwards, especially when you're being sued because of something breaking. So
is that an area that you think the state needs to reprioritize?
I know what you mean.
You know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
to put more money into.
I think if we were to take a magic marker and just write any state, fill in what you just said, the answer would be yes.
Please don't fill in what I just said.
Yeah, no, I believe every state in this country is guilty of not prioritizing infrastructure. It's not a priority, period, for a lot of people. I think it ought to be. I think literally, what could be more important than how you get to work, how you get to school, how you get to the other side of the state? I mean, it's hard enough getting to the other side of the state in this state because, we got roads that go up and down, but very few that are straight through. Which brings me to another point. I know there are many people, especially in my party, that don't support a train system. Expanding that whole network, or in the case of Western New Hampshire, creating that network. I think we absolutely should. Why wouldn't we? Everybody talks about how it'll just jam into the system into Boston and we'll lose jobs there. Well, they're driving to Boston anyway. We're going to lose those people anyway. But we build a nice transit system throughout New Hampshire, you can get places a lot faster in the state. All of a sudden it becomes more affordable, more economical to, if I had a job in Concord, I would like the option to not have to take my own vehicle. I think a train would be just the answer, or one of the answers. So.
Moving to a different type of infrastructure. This is an area of the state that is lagging in broadband access for companies, for students. For,
Yeah. And somebody that's involved in that business, I can
Yeah.
tell you, I absolutely agree. It
So-
still blows my mind. There's dial-up still in use.
Yeah.
I mean,
What does the state need to do to make that happen?
well, I mean, basically, you need more choices for businesses to deal with. You know, Time Warner doesn't have any competitors. Where Comcast is, they don't have any competitors. Maybe let's try to get some competition into this area that will expand and say, well, it'll take me 2 years to make a profit if I run this cable up 800 yards this way, but either I take this money or the other guy will. And maybe that would help, is basically just encourage the free market. And, you know, if once again it comes down to, if people want it and there's enough interest out there, eventually we'll get it. But I think the biggest thing right now is we just need more competition. And
Is there a legislative remedy to create that?
I don't know if that's the case. I think just, you know, once again, encouraging businesses to come in may be the way to do that.
So to be absolutely clear, no town by town bonding, no.
No.
No. Okay.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Switching gears, what are your thoughts on Second Amendment rights and the increase in gun violence and how to balance that?
All right, so unequivocally, I support the Second Amendment. I think that if we don't utilize our rights, they're like a muscle. If you don't exercise them, you're going to lose them. I don't think it's an issue of gun violence. I think it's an issue of mental illness and criminality. A person who legally owns a weapon is not the person we're targeting with gun legislation, or shouldn't be, because they're not going to break the law. The people who are going to break the law are the people who have no respect for the law. So, and as we've seen recently, there's mass stabbings just as easily as there are, mass shootings. There was a fella who quite successfully killed several people with a truck in France. I mean, unfortunately, we do live in a world where bad ideas get disseminated almost immediately because of the internet and other medias. And more importantly, if people want to kill, they will. So we have to try to figure out a way to balance civil liberties and, well, mental health, I think, is really the big one there. But the Second Amendment is sacrosanct.
So would you support background checks to find those people that shouldn't?
No, background checks are a good idea. They keep guns out of the hands of criminals. Because once again, if you're a law-abiding citizen, you're not the one we're worried about. We're worried about the felon who's trying to pull one over and buy a gun. Of course I want his background check pulled.
So do those need to be expanded at all? Or are they fine right now, the checks that exist?
I believe they're fine. I don't see any reason to change them.
So you think it's fine for people to buy over the internet or at gun
Well,
shows
okay, so
without a check?
I apologize. I think it's fine where they're being used currently. I do think the loophole online should be closed. There's a great process in place now. In fact, we recently just did this. I had a fellow I wanted to buy a gun from online. I ordered it from a third-party vendor who was shipping it to him. And then, because he's a gun dealer, part-time, I'm going to go see him. We're going to do the background check, and then he's going to release the gun into my custody. I'm going to pay him a fee for having done the background check and the transfer of ownership. That's a good method of which an online purchase should be done. This, you selling me a gun online, I mean, you don't know who I am. So that angle, I do believe we should close that. And gun shows should be no exception. I mean, for goodness sake, it takes 20 minutes maybe to do a background check. I mean, charge a little extra for the processing fee.
So the state of New Hampshire has some of the highest energy costs in the nation. What do we need? And maybe in your comments too, you could talk a little bit about how you view the state's role in dealing with major energy infrastructure projects such as the Northeast Direct Energy Pipeline, using that as a recent and local issue.
Now, I think energy is one of those things. It's kind of like having cell phone service in a rural area. Everybody wants it, but nobody wants to see the tower. So the first thing we need to do is try to figure out a balance between overcoming the objections of the infrastructure being created and the businesses that wish to profit from that. I don't know how we could have made that work. The northern pipeline, northern pass and all that. I think it was hopelessly flawed. I think the pipeline down southern New Hampshire was a hopelessly flawed concept.
How so?
Well, how to make money off of it for anybody. I mean, the reason they ultimately pulled their request for it and all that once the cost of natural gas came down was they couldn't make money. It wasn't because they bowed to the wishes of the people. They bowed to the mighty dollar. So,
What do you think about the idea of companies being able to put ratepayers on the hook for building their projects?
you know, that's an interesting question. I in one hand, I like the idea of businesses being able to pass off their expenses, but on the other hand, they should plan better and account for their own expenses. No, I don't like it. I think it's kind of a dirty way of doing business. Should I think it's illegal? No, I just think it's dirty. That's
Acknowledging that eventually the customer's going to pay anyway.
right. One way or the other, it's going to happen. I mean, look at the cable companies when they had their gas tax that they were adding because they were charging for the fuel. Well, what ended up happening is in a lot of areas, people rebelled against that and they took it away.
Do you have positions on Reggie or the net metering cap?
No, I don't.
Death penalty? Where do you stand on that?
I'm absolutely opposed to death penalty. I think the death penalty is an aberration. If we tell people it is illegal to murder, and all government is the expression of people in the plural, we can't be hypocrites. I can't tell you, no, don't kill, and then say, but since enough of us agree, we should kill you.
And just going back to your position on marijuana, there's been some criticism that there's not enough research having been done on the effects of legalizing that not enough, we haven't seen enough states, what happens in other states.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any downsides to legalizing?
Well, I don't smoke it myself, so I don't see any upside either. But other than the fact that people can live their own lives and make their own choices, we are Americans. You know, the Harrison Act, which was used to justify the war on marijuana, is a hopelessly flawed framework of law, and I think we would be best suited to be rid of it.
And to be clear, you see marijuana differently than you would see opioids or fentanyl.
There's a huge difference between what is organic and what is synthetic. I would still need to look into my thoughts on that. I would say that marijuana is, from what we can tell and from what we've been told, less harmful than drinking alcohol. If that's the case, then who cares? You know, you can go and kill yourself on cigarettes, you can kill yourself on alcohol. We have laws that prevent DWIs, or supposed to prevent DWIs. Those would be perfectly applicable in the case of marijuana, so I don't think there would be any greater public risk or danger.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Chester, you have said you oppose funding Planned Parenthood because of you don't believe the government should be subsidizing private businesses.
so what I was saying about that is that specifically what I was using as examples for that would be like Walmart or oil companies. You know, people who are going to make hideous amounts of money with or without us shouldn't be getting our money. That is not in any way applicable to what I was saying about bringing businesses in, because I know tax incentives can be looked at as a subsidizing of businesses, and that's not what I'm referring to. But as far as Planned Parenthood, they're a for-profit business. I would give them about as much support as I would give my own company, which is none. I have no ill will towards them. I do acknowledge that they do a service. It's not government funded.
Opposed to Bergeron Construction getting a bid to do some work
No,
in infrastructure?
That's a little different, wouldn't you think? I mean, they're providing a service to
So is Planned Parenthood.
directly to the state. I mean,
They're
I'm
providing
assuming
a service for the state that the state would otherwise have to pay for.
Well, I mean, I don't know that to be necessarily accurate, but I mean, when you're doing repair work or something like that, of course you're going to take bids because that's state money going to state project.
But they bid on that They bid on that
If,
contract.
if there is a contract that would be specific to their services, that was going out to other agencies, that isn't necessarily opposable to me.
Okay.
I cannot see any manner in which Planned Parenthood could be conceivably in a state bidding process, but if there was a bidding process and they were allowed into it because of a relevant business practice, I'd have no objection to that.
Just as a broader question, about a month ago, we were talking about kind of your approach to your platform, and one thing that you said was that you're staying sort of fiscally conservative, but that you've opened up. I can't remember if you said the word social libertarianism.
Right.
I just wanted to see if you could explain that a bit more and how that affects New Hampshire.
Well, a social libertarian is somebody that acknowledges it's your life to live. I don't have a negative view on many things because they don't apply, because it doesn't matter to me. If you want to live your life a certain way, as long as you're harming nobody.
Can you give us some examples? Or?
Well, sure, gay marriage, for instance, I absolutely don't care one way. If people want to be married, let them. Expressions of love, who cares? It's like I'll usually point at a house and say, I have no idea what that bedroom up there looks like, and I shouldn't know because it's none of my business. So.
Sure. Are there any other areas like that?
Well, drugs, marijuana. I don't. Once again, if you're not harming anybody, why does it matter? Guns. If you're not harming anybody, why do I care if you have one? Things of that nature. Just we can come up with a dozen examples, but as long as you're harming nobody and you're making your own choice and you accept the consequences of your choices in your own life, you should be free to do that.
Well,
Anything we haven't talked about that you maybe had planned to or would like to talk about?
I'm happy to talk about anything you guys want to.
do you think that the state ought to have give some thought to assisted suicide, death with dignity,
Sure.
end of life?
I absolutely support
issues?
that idea. And a lot of people think it's weird that I could be simultaneously against the death penalty, but in favor of euthanasia, assisted suicide. If a person makes an intelligible and legible decision that they believe that their time is up because of illness or various other circumstances, I don't think I have any right to tell them no. I have a moral obligation to try to talk them through it necessarily, and believe that we as a society should try to care for these people. But if they believe their time is up, of course we should support their wishes. It's their life.
Great.
All right.
Good session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming
Thanks
in.
for
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.